We're going in a different direction, Mark said, not even looking up from his laptop. The words hit me like a slap. I stood there frozen, clutching the stupid little cupcake I'd brought to share with the team. My birthday cupcake. I don't understand, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. The Westlake account just renewed at double their previous commitment. Richardson is finally on board, after 2 years of pitching. We're about to close Meridian next week. Mark sighed and finally looked up, clearly annoyed at having to explain himself. His eyes lingered on the cupcake in my hand, a small pink thing with a single unlit candle, before dismissing it as unimportant. Look, Jenna, you've done fine work. But the company needs fresh energy, new perspectives. He gestured toward the glass-walled conference room where a young man in an expensive suit was chatting with our CFO. My nephew Dylan just finished his MBA, top of his class at Wharton. He's got some innovative ideas for our client acquisition strategy. The nephew. Of course it was his nephew. My throat tightened as I watched Dylan laugh at something. All confidence and connections, and absolutely zero experience. 2 years ago, Mark had introduced him as an intern. The kid who couldn't figure out how to use the copy machine was now taking my clients, my accounts, my life. You want me to hand over everything to him? Today? I asked, still not quite believing this was happening. HR has prepared your separation package. Very generous, considering. Mark's tone suggested he was doing me a favor. We'll need your laptop, phone, and keycard before you leave. Dylan will reach out to your clients this afternoon to introduce himself. 7 years. 7 years I'd given to this company. Nights, weekends, missed family gatherings. The Christmas I spent in a hotel room in Cincinnati because the Thompson deal couldn't wait until after the holidays. The relationship that fell apart because I was never home. All for this moment. Standing in my boss's office on my 34th birthday, being replaced by his nephew. I didn't cry. Somehow that felt important. Not letting him see me cry. Of course, I said, placing the cupcake carefully on the edge of his desk. I'll clean out my office. As I turned to leave, Mark called after me. Oh, and Jenna, let's make this transition smooth, all right? Professional. I'd hate for this to affect your references. The threat was clear. Play nice, or he'd make sure I never worked in this industry again. I nodded, numb, and walked out. 2 hours later, I sat in my car in the parking garage, surrounded by cardboard boxes containing 7 years of my life. Photos, awards, the jade plant I'd kept alive since my first day. But not my client files, not my contacts, not the deals I'd built from nothing. Those belonged to the company, to Mark, to Dylan now. The security guard had watched me the entire time I packed. Company policy, he'd said apologetically, like I was a thief. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and finally let myself feel it all. Rage, humiliation, betrayal, the absolute unfairness of it. I had generated $4.7 million in revenue last year alone, the highest in the company's history. And this was my reward. When Mark hired me 7 years ago, I was desperate, fresh out of a divorce that left me with nothing but debt, sleeping on my sister's couch, applying for any job I could find. The position at Stratacore Solutions paid less than I needed. But it was something, a foot in the door. I still remember Mark's words in that first interview. We're like family here. What a joke that seems like now. Back then, I believed it. I believed in the company, in the work, in myself. I stayed late learning everything I could. I volunteered for the accounts nobody wanted. The small businesses, the difficult clients, the long shots. I built relationships hour by hour, call by call. There was no magic to it, just hard work and genuine care. I remembered their kids' names, their hobbies, their concerns. I followed up. I called when I said I would. I told them the truth, even when it wasn't what they wanted to hear. Especially then. 2 years in, I landed the Westlake account, my first big win. They were a mid-sized manufacturing company looking to overhaul their entire supply chain management system. Their CEO, Barbara, had been burned by consultants before. "Why should I trust you?" she asked me bluntly during our third meeting. "You shouldn't," I said. "Not yet. Trust comes with delivery." She smiled at that. It was the beginning of a partnership that would eventually be worth millions to Stratacore, to Mark. After Westlake came Richardson, then Meridian, then a dozen others. My client list grew, and so did the revenue I generated. My salary increased too, but never in proportion to what I brought in. When I asked for a raise last year, showing Mark the numbers, the growth, the client retention rates, he looked pained. "Times are tight, Jenna. We're all making sacrifices." 2 weeks later, he drove up in a new Tesla. I should have seen it then. Maybe I did. But I ignored it. I had put too much of myself into this job to acknowledge what was happening. My clients needed me. The projects needed me. I told myself that was enough. The Christmas party last year. That's when I first noticed Dylan hanging around the executive meetings. Mark introducing him to our biggest clients at the holiday gala. The way Mark would casually drop into conversation. Dylan had an interesting perspective on this. I felt a twist of unease, but pushed it away. I was bringing in record numbers. My client satisfaction scores were perfect. My position was secure. Wasn't it? Then came the little things. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Decisions made without my input. Email chains where my name was mysteriously absent. Mark asking for just a quick overview of my client strategies for the quarterly report. Always with that same pleasant, empty smile. In February, Barbara from Westlake called me, confused. "Is there someone new working on our account?" Mark introduced me to his nephew yesterday. "Just supporting staff." I lied, my stomach sinking. "Nothing to worry about. I'm still your point person." But I was worried, very worried. I started keeping better records after that. Every email, every contract, every conversation. I backed up client communications. I documented my processes, my strategies, my relationships. Not for Stratacore, but for myself. A quiet insurance policy I hoped I'd never need. I also started reaching out to my clients differently. More personal connections. Coffee meetings without the company logo hovering in the background. Texts instead of emails on the company system. Building relationships that existed outside the confines of Stratacore Solutions. Was that wrong? Maybe, probably. But somewhere deep down, I knew what was coming. The Richardson deal was the tipping point. A year of work. Countless meetings, proposals, revisions. Nights spent rehearsing presentations in hotel room mirrors. All to land a contract that would transform both their business and ours. The day they finally signed, Mark took the entire executive team out to celebrate. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from Sarah in accounting, who asked me how the champagne toast had been. "What champagne toast?" I asked. Her face told me everything I needed to know. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out my laptop and started making plans. Not for revenge, not yet. Just for survival. I updated my resume. I looked at my savings and calculated how long I could last without a paycheck. I made a list of every client contact I had, every relationship I'd built, and I started making calls. Not job hunting that would come later. These were different calls. "Barbara, it's Jenna. I wanted to catch up. Not about work, just, how are things with your daughter's college applications?" Mike from Richardson? "Hey, it's Jenna. I know it's after hours, but I remembered you mentioned that fishing trip. How was it?" One by one, I reached out to every major client I'd worked with. Personal calls, human connections, reminding them subtly that they worked with me. Not just with Stratacore, that I was the one who understood their needs, who had earned their trust. Was I preparing for the worst? Yes. Was I being paranoid? I didn't think so. But even then, I never imagined it would happen on my birthday. HR gave me a cardboard box for my things, and a manila envelope with my separation agreement. They explained the terms while I half listened, still in shock. 6 weeks severance, healthcare through the end of the month, a non-disparagement clause, and the kicker, a non-compete. So restrictive, it basically barred me from working in my field for a year within a 100-mile radius. If you could sign this today, we'll process your final paycheck immediately, the HR director said, sliding a pen toward me. I stared at the pen, at the papers, at the box where I was supposed to put 7 years of my life. I'll need to review these documents with my attorney, I said, finding my voice at last. I'm sure you understand. Her smile tightened. Of course. But we do need your company property before you leave the building. I handed over my laptop, my phone, my keycard. Each item felt like giving away a piece of myself. As I packed my personal belongings, I could see Dylan through the glass walls of my office. My former office, being led around by Mark, introducing him to my team, my team. They looked confused, uncomfortable. A few glanced my way, but quickly averted their eyes when they saw me watching. Only Raj, my deputy, had the courage to come say goodbye. This is wrong, he whispered, helping me pack a photo frame. After everything you've done for this place. I squeezed his arm. It's business, Raj, nothing personal. But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. 7 years of my life, gone in an afternoon. And not just the job, the identity, the purpose, the future I thought I was building. I sat there, surrounded by my sad little boxes, and felt something crystallize inside me. Not just anger, something colder, clearer. They thought they could just replace me, that I was interchangeable, that the relationships I'd built, the trust I'd earned, the knowledge I carried, all of it could be handed over to Dylan with his fresh MBA and his uncle's last name. They were wrong. I pulled out my personal phone, not the company one I'd just surrendered, and opened a document I'd created months ago. A document titled Plan B. I'd never actually intended to use it. It was just insurance, a way to feel less powerless in a company where I was increasingly aware of my precarious position. But now, running my finger down the list of names and numbers, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Mark had taken my job, my clients, my reputation. But he'd forgotten something crucial. He'd forgotten what I kept. I drove home in a daze. The boxes from my office sat untouched in my trunk for 3 days. I couldn't bear to look at them. Instead, I pulled the blinds closed and disappeared into my apartment. I ignored calls from my sister, from friends wondering why I wasn't at work. I ordered takeout that I barely touched and stared at walls until my eyes burned. It wasn't just a job. It was 7 years of my life, my identity, the thing I was good at. On the 4th day, I woke up and realized I had to make a choice. I could stay in that dark apartment and let Mark win, or I could do something about it. I showered for the first time in days, put on real clothes, made coffee, and then I opened my laptop and really looked at Plan B. The document contained contact information for every major client I'd worked with. Not their company email addresses or office numbers, but their personal cell phones, private emails, even home addresses for some. It listed birthdays, spouse names, children's ages, personal interests, and vulnerabilities. Not the kind of vulnerabilities you exploit, but the kind you protect. The kinds of things you know about people you actually care about. Next to each name were notes about their contract terms with Stratacore, renewal dates, pain points, services they needed but weren't getting, promises Mark had made but never fulfilled. This wasn't just a contact list. It was a map of relationships, real human connections I'd built over 7 years, while Mark was playing golf and buying Teslas. I took a deep breath and made my first call. Barbara? It's Jenna. Do you have a minute? Barbara's voice immediately warmed. Jenna, I was just thinking about you. Dylan reached out yesterday, said you'd left the company. What happened? I chose my words carefully. The non-disparagement clause meant I couldn't badmouth Stratacore or Mark, but I didn't need to. Mark decided to go in a different direction. I said simply, I wanted to call personally to thank you for the opportunity to work together these past years. It's meant a lot to me. Well, this is unexpected, Barbara said. I could hear the concern in her voice. You've been our rock through this entire system transition. Is there anything I should know? Again, I was careful. I'm confident Stratacore will continue providing services under your current contract. Dylan is very enthusiastic. The pause after enthusiastic said everything I couldn't. Barbara, sharp as ever, caught it immediately. Enthusiasm doesn't replace experience or trust. She paused. What are your plans now? I'm considering my options, I said, which wasn't a lie. Let's get coffee next week, she suggested. Not as client and vendor, just as people who've worked closely for years. One by one, I made similar calls to my top clients. Not to poach them, that would violate my non-compete. Just to say goodbye, to express gratitude, to close loops. But a strange thing happened. Without me mentioning it, almost every conversation ended the same way. Let's stay in touch. Keep me posted on your next move. I'd love to grab lunch soon. They cared about me. Not just as a service provider, but as a person. I'd built that. Me, not Stratacore, not Mark. Maybe that was worth something. 2 weeks passed. I met with an employment attorney who reviewed my separation agreement. This non-compete is aggressive, she said, frowning at the document, but not enforceable, especially given the circumstances of your termination. Did they give you any warning? Performance improvement plan? Documentation of issues? Nothing, I said. I was their top performer. She made some notes. And this was the same day they brought in the owner's nephew? I nodded. Interesting timing, she said with a small smile. Here's what I suggest. We drafted a counter-proposal. I would sign an amended agreement that limited the non-compete to direct competitors only, not the entire consulting industry, and reduce the geographic restriction to 25 miles, not 100. In exchange, I wouldn't challenge the termination or pursue any claims against Stratacore. Mark rejected it immediately. His response came through Stratacore's sign the original agreement, or forfeit the severance package. Fine. I'd survived without their money before. I could do it again. I declined the severance and returned the unsigned agreement. That evening, I got a text from Raj. Dylan bombed the Meridian pitch today. Completely tanked it. They're walking. I felt a pang of satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt. The Meridian deal would have meant bonuses for the whole team, including Raj. My revenge shouldn't hurt the people who weren't responsible. But then came another text. Also, Barbara from Westlake called Mark directly, said they're reviewing their contract options. My coffee with Barbara had been pleasant. We'd talked about her daughter's college acceptance, her husband's new hobby, the vacation she was planning. Business didn't come up until the very end. I'm not asking you to say anything inappropriate, she'd said carefully. But as someone who's trusted you for years, I'd appreciate your professional assessment of our current situation with Stratacore. I'd considered my words carefully. Stratacore has excellent technical capabilities, but in my experience, successful consulting relationships depend on trust, communication, and deep understanding of client needs. Those things take time to develop. Barbara had nodded slowly. Indeed, they do. Now, reading Raj's text, I wondered if Barbara had taken that conversation to heart. A month after my termination, I made a decision. I couldn't work directly in my field due to the non-compete threat, but I could teach. I reached out to the local university and offered to guest lecture on business relationship management for their MBA program. No pay needed, just the opportunity to share what I knew. They accepted immediately, and that's how, 6 weeks after losing everything, I found myself standing in front of a classroom of graduate students, talking about the work I loved. Consulting isn't about having all the answers, I told them. It's about asking the right questions. It's about listening. Really listening to what people need, even when they don't know how to express it. After class, several students approached with questions. One handed me her card. My father runs a manufacturing business, she said. He's been looking for someone to help streamline their processes. Would you be interested in meeting him? By month 2, I had 3 independent consulting clients, all in industries different enough from Stratacor's focus to avoid non-compete issues. Small businesses with small budgets, but real problems I knew how to solve. I worked from my dining room table, kept my overhead low, and slowly, carefully began rebuilding. I also kept in touch with my former Stratacor clients. Just friendly check-ins. How are things going? How's your daughter enjoying college? Did you take that fishing trip? And they told me things. Not because I asked, but because they wanted to. This new guy doesn't understand our system at all. We had to explain our entire workflow from scratch. He keeps pushing services we don't need. I never commented, never suggested they leave Stratacor. I just listened and remembered. Meanwhile, through Raj and other former colleagues, I heard about what was happening inside Stratacor. Dylan was struggling. The clients I'd nurtured for years were growing frustrated. Revenue was down. Mark was increasingly irritable, blaming everyone but himself and his nephew. 3 months after my firing, I received an unexpected email from Barbara, starting a new consulting search, wondering if you're available to discuss. Not related to current provider. We met for dinner the following week. Barbara didn't waste time. We're not renewing with Stratacor, she said bluntly. The service quality has dropped significantly. Your replacement seems more interested in upselling us than understanding our needs. I nodded, but said nothing. Our contract allows us to give 30 days' notice, she continued. I'm preparing to do that next week. Before I do, I wanted to ask, what exactly are you doing now, Jenna? I explained my situation. The non-compete, the independent consulting for smaller businesses, the teaching. Barbara listened carefully, then said, what if I told you Westlake is establishing a new subsidiary, one that would need an entire consulting team for a complete digital transformation? I frowned, not understanding. We're creating a separate entity for our East Coast expansion, she explained. New company, new EIN, new everything. It would need a head of operations who understands both technology implementation and relationship management. She smiled slightly. The subsidiary would be headquartered 26 miles from Stratacor's offices. I checked. Just outside my non-compete's geographical restriction. Are you offering me a job? I asked, stunned. Better, Barbara replied. I'm offering you a division with a budget to build your own team. It took a moment for the implications to sink in. I could hire people, I could create something new, and I could do it with Westlake's resources behind me. Why? I finally asked. Why would you do this? Barbara set down her fork. Because in business, as in life, how you treat people matters. Mark didn't just fire you, Jenna. He showed me exactly who he is and how he operates. That's not someone I want managing my company's future. 2 weeks later, I accepted Barbara's offer. 1 month after that, I moved into a small but beautiful office, 26.2 miles from Stratacor's headquarters. The first person I hired was Raj. And then I waited. The revenge I'd initially fantasized about. The scorched earth, burn it all down kind, wasn't what happened in the end. Reality is more subtle, more complete. 6 months after my birthday firing, I sat in my new office reviewing applications for our growing team. My phone buzzed with a text from Raj. Richardson just gave notice to Stratacor. A week later, Meridian officially terminated their contract today. Then, Mark is calling emergency revenue meetings every morning now. I didn't poach a single client. I didn't have to. They were leaving on their own, one by one, as Dylan proved incapable of maintaining the relationships I'd built. Some came to us at the new Westlake subsidiary. Others went to different firms entirely. It didn't matter to me where they went. What mattered was that they were choosing what was right for their businesses. 9 months after my firing, I received a LinkedIn request from Mark. I accepted out of curiosity. Minutes later, a message arrived. Jenna. Would love to grab coffee and catch up. No agenda, just two professionals reconnecting. I knew exactly what this was. Stratacor was in trouble, Mark was desperate, and now he wanted me to bail him out somehow. I agreed to meet, not for revenge, but for closure. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our offices. Mark looked terrible, thinner, grayer, the confident smirk replaced by weary tension around his eyes. "You look well," he said after awkward greetings. "I hear you're doing some interesting work with Westlake's new division." I nodded, but offered nothing more. After painful small talk, he finally got to the point. "Look, Jenna, I may have been hasty in my decision last year. We've had some client retention issues since you left. Dylan is talented, but he's still learning the ropes." I sipped my coffee, waiting. "I'm wondering if you might consider coming back," he said, leaning forward. "As a VP. Significant salary increase, of course. Corner office, full benefits. We could really use your client relationship skills." And there it was, the moment I'd imagined for months. Mark needing me, admitting in his way that he'd made a mistake. In my darkest days after the firing, I'd fantasized about this moment, telling him exactly where he could shove his offer, watching him squirm, making him beg. But, sitting across from him now, I felt none of the satisfaction I'd anticipated. Just a calm certainty about who I was and what I'd built. "Thank you for the offer, Mark," I said quietly, "but I'm happy where I am." His face fell. "We can negotiate the terms. Whatever Westlake is paying, we can." I held up my hand. "It's not about money, it never was." "Then what? What do you want?" There was genuine confusion in his voice. I studied him for a moment. He truly didn't understand. "I wanted to be valued," I said simply. "I wanted the work I did to matter, the relationships I built to be respected." "Your work did matter," he insisted. "That's why I'm here. That's why we need you back." I shook my head slowly. "You only see the value now that it's gone. That's not the same thing." I gathered my things and stood up. No dramatic exit. No final cutting remark. Just the quiet dignity of someone who no longer needed his approval or his company. "I wish you and Stratacore the best, Mark. I really do." As I walked out, I felt his eyes on my back. 7 years ago, I'd sat in his office, desperate for a job, for a chance. Now I was walking away, completely on my own terms. That was the revenge. Not destroying him or his company, not taking his clients, or exposing his nepotism. Just building something better. Something he couldn't touch or take credit for. Something that proved, definitively, that my success had never been about Stratacore. It had always been about me. 3 months later, I heard from Raj that Stratacore was being acquired by a larger firm. Mark was being replaced as CEO. Dylan was transitioning to a special projects role. Corporate. Speak for being sidelined. I felt no joy at the news, no vindication. Just a quiet acknowledgement that consequences eventually find everyone. On my 35th birthday, exactly 1 year after the firing, I brought cupcakes to my team. As we celebrated in our bright office, my team, my vision, I realized something profound. The best revenge isn't making others suffer for what they did to you. It's living so well that what they did doesn't matter anymore.